when it comes to information about development in particular and about government activities in general. The World Bank, many other organizations have decided to make their data public, and the President of the United States and the President of Brazil have launched the Open Government Initiative at the UN Assembly a couple of days ago. So what this means is that we are about to have a deluge of data, a deluge of information. And to some extent, anybody who is interested in that information will have to learn how to drink out of a fire hydrant. In a sense, we are going to be literally overwhelmed with information. So what we thought would be interesting is to see to what extent the transformation of lots and lots and lots of data into visual summaries, into a much more synthetic presentation, provided, of course, that it meets the rules or the advice that we just heard from our keynote speaker, might actually make a difference. And to help us begin to explore this extremely important and still developing field, and having heard Professor Tufte, I realized how much we have to travel from where we are to where we need to be to actually transform this mass of information into the sort of map that he showed us about the Russia campaign of Napoleon. We have three very good people to help us work through these points, and in the interest of time, I will abbreviate their CVs. Charles Kenny, to my right, on your left, is a senior fellow at the Center for Global Development. He's been at the World Bank. He's an expert on development, and he has recently published a book about why development is actually giving positive results. To his right is Aleem Walji, who is the practice manager at the World Bank Institute for the innovation team. And having myself worked at the World Bank for a good many years, I can testify to how Aleem has shaken up the place and really introduced ideas at a speed that is unknown at the World Bank, and made quite a bit of difference. He has worked before that with the Aga Khan Foundation in Syria, and he will talk to us about what it means to move a place like the World Bank. And to his right is Stuart Gill, who is currently the lead of the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery Labs at the World Bank. He has had to come in at the last minute because Sarosh Kumar Shah, who was supposed to be with us, has been called to a meeting at the World Bank and sends his apologies. Stuart has essentially also been one of the incubators of change at the World Bank, and he has worked in different places there. And before that, he was a research fellow in astrophysics at Columbia University. So you can see that astrophysics leads to development. So we, among the many ideas that existing data has spun, is the fact that development does not have a very good name. There is a lot of people who are convinced that aid money is actually wasted. And Charles, you published recently a book that actually shows that there have been some positive developments about the results of the aid. And I wonder to what extent you think that the data presented in a different way could help make the point and convince people that indeed it is worthwhile to continue financing aid.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa. First of all, I should say that I'm certainly no expert in data visualization, so I'm here to learn. I guess I'm here up on the stage mainly because I wanted to tell my mum that I'd performed at the Kennedy Center. Given all that, I won't take up too much of your time. I did actually try to sum up everything I wanted to say in a picture, but I'm no tufty, so you'll have to actually put up with me talking, and I'm sorry about that. As Jean-Louis mentioned, a lot of my writing is on how things are getting better around the world, across a range of measures, even in the poorest countries, even countries that have gone backwards in terms of income growth. And I'll get back to why I think there's a role for aid in that story, but I found that a very easy way to demonstrate what I'm trying to say in the book is just to show people Gapminder, show people Hans Rosling's picture of the bouncing bubbles going up and down on income versus life expectancy, and a whole load of the bubbles just go straight up. So even though they've seen no income growth, they've seen a huge amount of improvement in life expectancy over the last 100 years. Sorry. And a second, that's a picture we have, and I think it's a terribly powerful picture. A picture I would love to see to illustrate another part of the book is actually a picture that could demonstrate the power of national institutions to control development outcomes. Institutions is the story of the moment in development economics. Everybody thinks they rule the roost. We now have regional level data for a lot of countries around the world on income and on health and so on and so forth. If you just did a global map with using regional data on income and life expectancy and so on, you'd see national borders, but they wouldn't be terribly clear. And I think it'd be a very powerful way to say there is a lot more to the story than this thing that all the development economists are talking about at the moment, which is national level institutions. So there are definitely lots of plausible ways, I think, to use visualization to make points in a very easy and straightforward way. And again, I'm not an expert in this area, but I did see recently a paper by Brendan Nyhan and Jason Reifler suggesting that visual representation of data can be particularly powerful when what you're trying to do is change people's minds. Graphical corrections are found to successfully reduce incorrect beliefs amongst potentially resistant subjects and to perform better than an equivalent textual correction, they say. This is terribly bad news for me. My book actually has absolutely no pictures in it because the editor took them all out. He said that if you have graphs in particular in a book, people assume it's academic and they don't want to read it. But it's good news for you all because I think it means that you're right to be here, that this is a terribly important area. And again, particularly when it comes to aid effectiveness, clearly there is a widespread belief out there that aid isn't terribly effective. And in particular, there's an interesting set of survey results that suggest, on the one hand, you ask people in the United States or in Europe, do you have a moral duty to help people in poor countries? Everybody says yes. And then you ask them, would you give more money if you thought that the aid would actually get delivered? Everybody says yes. Then you say, so what percentage of the aid do you actually think gets successfully delivered rather than stolen by kleptocrats or lost in the bureaucracy? And they say, 20-30%. There is a huge belief out there that one, actually we have a duty to do something, and two, the thing that stops us wanting to do anything is that we can't. And the reason we can't is because aid is wasted. And I think that data and better visualization of data can obviously, one, be a tool to reduce waste and corruption. Reduce that problem. But also, I think it can be a tool to persuade people that they're wrong to think that all aid is wasted and that actually aid dollars are doing some good. A lot of people in this room will know the Reneke and Svensson story about Uganda, where basically there was a grant money that was meant to be going down to schools in order to provide money for supplies. None of it was reaching the schools. They started publishing in the newspapers the amount of money that was meant to reach the schools, and they started putting that information on the front door of the school. And quite dramatically and quite fast, the percentage of money that actually got to the schools went through the roof and ended up above 90%. Now, that kind of data could be wonderfully illustrated using a map with little circles for each school that gradually fill up as more of the money actually that's meant to reach the school reaches the school. And on the aid effectiveness side, we face a real problem, which is there's a hugely long causal chain from taxpayers handing over dollars to outcomes we care about on the ground. So take even, I think, probably one of the most simple cases, which is sort of vaccination programs, right? The taxpayer gives the money is maybe used to buy vaccines, the vaccines are maybe delivered to the country, maybe some of those vaccines actually reach rural areas, maybe some of those vaccines that reach rural areas actually get injected into kids, and maybe some fewer kids die. You can sort of demonstrate a link between aid and outcomes using a whole bunch of tables, and Gavi and other donors interested in this area do that every year, lots and lots of tables, usually with a picture of a live kid at the end smiling. And that's something, but I think you can imagine a Napoleon's march to Moscow and back image, which is about the flow of money from USAID in Washington to kids, staying alive in Uganda, as it might be. And you can, I think, there's a wonderful role for more work in that area. I think we do have to admit, and be honest about this, that the marginal dollar won't be as well spent in the United States as it is in Africa. If what you're asking about is how much of that dollar will go to what the bureaucrat says the dollar should go to. In Africa, a lot of the money is going to go missing one way or another, not all corruption at all, but just sort of inefficiency and waste and so on. And this is where I think the visualization comes in, the marginal impact of the few cents that makes it through is a lot larger than the marginal impact of a dollar in the United States. How much does it cost to save a year of life in Uganda compared to what it costs in the United States? It's fractions of a percent. And I think this kind of message is far more easy to get across visually than it is in text or speaking. And I fear that may be a point I have just amply demonstrated by trying to talk it through. But with that, I pass it back.
Thank you very much. I like very much the idea of the map on the march of vaccines. I'm going to have to think about this, how to translate that. I was on the board of Gavi for a good many years, and we never found the way to really convey, other than with the picture of a smiling child, but it's become so cliched right now that it doesn't make a sense. So pictures, it's interesting also that your editor decided that visualization was no good in the book. We're going to have to get him to listen to Dr. Tufti a bit more. Alim, you've had the remarkable challenge of introducing pictures in the World Bank. So how did you do it?
Well, so as a kind of Edward Tufti groupie for years, I discovered another hero. Are you able to hear? I discovered another hero when I spent some time at Google, who was Hans Rosling. Hans and I shared an office together. And he used to tell me about what he called DBHD, database hugging disorder. And he said that this is an affliction, which is a really, really big problem in these large multilateral institutions. They don't understand kind of simple information presentation. They don't ask the right questions, and they definitely don't share their information. So when I had this opportunity to come to the World Bank, all my friends said, "Are you serious? You're actually considering a job at the World Bank?" And innovation, World Bank, aren't those two kind of opposite things? And so that's what I told sort of when the panel talked to me about that. That was my approach. But then I figured, look, there are times in life where either you continue to curse the darkness or you light a candle. And I decided that I was going to try something. And it really began with a very simple question, which is goes back to the notion of visuals, which is that who does what where? Do we at the World Bank know where in the country we actually work and how that relates to poverty? So I'm just going to show you a picture, which was really the impetus to a program which we launched called Mapping for Results. So what you see up there is a picture of Nigeria, and in the background there, and it's not terribly disaggregated, but the heat map there shows poverty in Nigeria. So the darker the color, the higher the degree of poverty. On the right-hand side, what you have is the relative concentration of World Bank projects. In the blue circles, the larger the circle, the larger our sort of footprint in
Funding.
the country. And then on the left-hand side is where you actually then see by sector the concentration of where we work. So you start to ask the question, are we where we should be? Green is agriculture, red is healthcare, blue is water, et cetera. And these are layers that you can sort of turn on and off. And believe it or not, when we showed these pictures to our country directors, they themselves were sort of shocked. There's an image that I often use of Kenya where you show the mashup between infant mortality and where our healthcare projects are, and they don't actually mash up very well. Now, there may be reasons for that that can be explained well, but I certainly don't know what those answers are. And I think it's a question worth asking. So that's where this whole kind of enterprise began, and it sort of grew out of a commitment, and my kind of rock star colleagues are here that really did open data at the bank, people like Neil and others, that it was part of this kind of opening up that said, why should public data that taxpayers pay for not be free? Why should it not be searchable? Why should it not be reusable? And so that kind of revolution that was going on all around the World Bank, we sort of brought to the World Bank. And what Neil will tell you is that traffic to our site immediately grew by orders of magnitude. You know, we started asking, are we the data bank? Are we the World Bank? And we started realizing that we were generating more traffic than the World Bank's homepage. People cared. There was a difference between our clients and our users. Our clients were a handful of countries who took loans, but our users were thousands and thousands of people like you that come to us for information. And so one of my colleagues actually said yesterday, a really interesting question, you know, we are often have kind of existential crises at the bank, and one of ours more recently is, are we a bank with brains or are we a university with money? You know, this whole notion of the knowledge bank, et cetera. And I actually think, as Edward would say, I think neither of those are the right question. Because if we presume one or the other, we then condition our response accordingly. Ultimately, we're about poverty alleviation. We're about solving development problems. And the point is, sometimes, if we look at it from that perspective, sometimes the access we have to information and knowledge can be leveraged. Sometimes access to finance can be leveraged. Sometimes they have to be decoupled. Sometimes perhaps we should just get out of the way and let other people solve the problems sort of by themselves. So the sort of level of transparency and openness that I think open data has meant for the bank is, you know, I sort of say, look, opening the bank is one thing. Visualizing what I've just shown you is certainly interesting. This is another example where we then went down to the country level and said, okay, it's one thing to open the bank, but what if we could look at a country? And here's an example of Kenya, where you see on the right-hand side a map of a district in Kenya where the darker the green, the higher the rate of children out of school. And when we mashed up that data set with the country's own data set of school locations, we found an almost perfect correlation between where kids were out of school and where there were no schools. Right? So it's one thing for the World Bank to open up its data. That's kind of what I call cute and interesting. But where it gets really serious is where we start talking to all donors and say, what are you going to do about your data? And then ultimately when we look at our client governments themselves, that's where it gets interesting and really kind of important, I would say. So ultimately the vision here is to say, can we open up country-level data on all public expenditure so that people can do what I call Yelp for development? Why is it that we can rate restaurants in San Francisco and New York and Washington, but we can't rate health clinics or doctors or bridges in Kenya, Liberia, or Ghana? And the data that I think is really missing is the citizen source data. So while we talk about the data deluge, I actually still think there's a data gap here, which is that you can put the supply side of the equation on maps and online. But the data that I really care about is the data that comes from users. So for the World Bank, what that really means is paying attention not just to our clients. We paid plenty of attention to our clients in Egypt and Tunisia. We need to start paying attention to our clients' clients, to the end users. We'd be doing our clients a service if we taught them how to listen. And so here's an example of kind of phase 2 of Mapping for Results, which is created by CCAPS, and was a partnership that the bank had with the Development Gateway and with 8Data, which many of you here know and are kind of around the room, which is we said, let's take one country and let's create something that people will say, it's a crime that you only do this for one country, which is let's put all donor resources on a map for one country. Malawi is highly aid dependent. It's a country where you can look at poverty, again by heat map. And here's a map that shows what 27 donors are doing in Malawi. And as Jean-Louis says, it looks like 5th grade soccer, right? Everybody goes to where the ball is. There's not necessarily a rational distribution between poverty or between where you would expect to see a sort of coordination of aid, but what you see is high degrees of, of sort of us being in the same place at the same time. Now, as we start looking at more countries this way, as we start looking at development indicators in this way, I think we can start having a very different conversation about aid effectiveness. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alim. I think having been at the World Bank for a good many years, I think that this is really the combination of not only making information available, but making it available in a way that speaks to non-technical audiences and to senior decision makers is really what is making a difference. And what has been striking to me is the reception that these maps have had at the most senior levels in the organization. And that has spread to others who have come to Development Gateway and others to say, can you do this for us as well? So I think that there is a movement afoot that has to do with the power of visualization. Now, visualization is absolutely essential in the work that Stuart does in disaster reduction and recovery. And maybe we can hear from you a couple of concrete examples of how that works in your work, and also an interesting story of how you got to data visualization yourself.
Yeah, sure. So as I was a ringer, as I was told that I was going to sit in for Siraj at 8 a.m. this morning, I thought it's only fair that I get to share the first opportunity that I had to visualize data myself. So when I first began my PhD, this was the first data set that I was given. And this data set it's a phenomenally exciting data set.
Can't you tell?
So in this data set you have the largest galaxy redshift survey of all time, at that particular time in history, of course. And it was 250,000 galaxies, the distances to 250,000 galaxies. And I knew that this was an amazing data set, but this text file just wasn't getting me excited. So the very first data visualization I did was to turn this data set into this, and to be able to essentially go through this and, although the movie doesn't work on this computer, to fly through the large-scale structure of the universe and see where the galaxy clusters were and see where the voids were and to see why certain galaxies were clustering together and what state of evolution they were in and so on and so forth. And to me, data visualization at that point really became such an integral part, not just to how I did my research, but to really fundamental in terms of how to communicate and tell a story as well. So last week I was in Uganda, so from astrophysics to disaster risk management. Last week I was in Uganda speaking with the Office of the Prime Minister, and this is a country that was reasonably affected by the drought that's going on in the Horn at the moment, but they're also affected by floods at the same time. So drought and floods, it's a little bit of a difficult thing to get your head around. But so the Office of the Prime Minister was really struggling to be able to advocate for disaster risk management in their country. And it wasn't surprising to me that the number one product that they wanted for communication within the government was a beautiful glossy atlas of where the hazards and risks were in their country, so they could start to socialize and communicate that. And so they can either start to go down via sector and also go into understand which are the districts that are the most vulnerable. And so the presentation of these data sets in these ways is an incredibly powerful tool for advocacy. I'll show one other picture. This is an image from a recent publication of the World Bank and the United Nations called natural hazards and natural disasters, the economics of effective prevention. And this shows the percentage of GDP impact by disaster on countries. And graphs like this, you can really immediately start to see the difference and how the bias is towards the developing world in terms of the impact of disasters. I mean, you look at Pakistan up there, it's a big red, big blotch, much larger than it usually is. And then you say a country that has another lot of disasters, say like Australia, but has the economic capability to absorb those disasters. And so figures like this clearly have their role in communicating the effects of this data in a meaningful way. One of the number one recommendations out of this report was that there was for effective disaster risk management, what you need to do is, like the Open Data Initiative, is get that data out, get it into the hands of the decision makers, but also get it in the hands of citizens so they can make the choices themselves and understand, is this a place where I want to live? I know that there's a lot of hazard in this location. And let them make the cost-benefit analysis themselves of, if it's high hazard here, is this where I want to live? But maybe access to market is overweighs that vulnerability to natural disasters. So it allows people to have their data themselves to make those decisions. And so out of this, we have begun an initiative called, about a year ago, the Open Data for Resilience Initiative. And what this initiative looks at is being able to open up data around disaster and climate and being able to create tools to take that data from being data to put it into maps and then turn that into support for government officials, but also citizens in decision making. So just one example of this is a tropical cyclone wind hazard in Fiji. This is a study that was done for the Pacific, an exquisite data set that we actually finished for the Pacific. We managed to map out essentially every single building in 15 countries in the Pacific. So we have building by building infrastructure for pretty much the whole of the Pacific, and a disaster and climate data set that is absolutely gorgeous. This is just one of the maps. And so now you create maps, but how do you go from this map to support decisions? You look at this map and you say, okay, where are my most vulnerable populations? How do I change my land planning to do more effective disaster risk management? Where do I put my shelters so when the cyclone comes through, I'm going to be most it's going to be most effective in preventing damage and saving populations, and so on. But then what we want to do is we want to go beyond just maps to tell a story and for advocacy and to support decision making. We want to create tools to enable that decision making as well. So we're also in this initiative creating a number of tools like this one, Risiko or Risk in a Box, which is essentially a visualization that interactively allows the government to do a risk assessment and gives rapid feedback into terms, okay, I do this mitigation measure, how does that affect the risk in my country? And so we're working in over 25 countries, and we should have this deployed in 25 countries by the end of this year, hopefully early next year. The last thing I'll quickly mention is this work that Hemang Karelia in our team is heading up, and that is a cooperation with Development Gateway. And this is the disaster aid tracking. So a lot of work, a lot of people along the panel have been talking about this, and this is a fantastic initiative, and it's got a number of different ways to visualize the data from graphs to the tickers and so on and so forth. And one of the things that we're really hoping that this helps us in is being able to understand where the aid goes for disaster risk management. Does it go into the humanitarian area? Does it go into the reconstruction? And yes, lots of the money is going to humanitarian response, lots of money is going into reconstruction, but the money is not going into risk reduction. And if we want to really make a change and impact in development, that's where we need to put our money into. So these aid tracking tools and the visualizations help us advocate for those types of actions at the international level. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stuart. We have 5 minutes left, and I'd like to first see if the panelists would like to react to each other, ask a question to each other, whether, Charles, you have found the reasons to convince your editor now to put some graphs into the book. And if not, then let's take maybe a couple of questions. We don't have much time because I've been given the difficult task to catch up for the time that we gave Professor Tufte that I'm happy to do because I enjoyed the conversation earlier. So are there any questions in the audience?
Or comments?
The-
How universal are they? In other words, if I'm sitting in country X, do I need World Bank to show me how to do this? I'm sorry, I do need World Bank to show me how to do this. Can I continue to do this? Because that makes it really a tool.
Yeah, so in terms of our very much approach to this is, you know, in the bank we talk about technical assistance and capacity building. When we go around a project like this, we're really defining it by what we call participatory technical assistance. So what that means is the country involved in actually building the tool, in actually tailoring it to what their needs are. So for example, this tool was built with the government of Indonesia. This tool here was built with SOPAC, the regional organization in the Pacific. So there's a very much an ownership of the country in participating in creating these open source tools and providing the incentives to open up their data. So do you want to add to that, Elaine?
Yeah, I was just going to say that all of our maps, sorry, I went to the wrong one. Can you just pull up Nigeria one more time? That maps.worldbank.org is where all of the maps that I showed you are. They're all publicly available. And more importantly than the maps, especially for this crowd, I think, all of the data can be downloaded. They're all either in shape files, KML files, CSV files, et cetera. So you can go create your own maps. In fact, I hope you do better than us. Because I think that's really the power of this. It's not just about the visualizations. It's about you have a question. What's your question? We give you the content. Make it relevant. Let's make sure we're asking the right questions, as I think Professor Tufte would say. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's right up here.
Access to the graphs is really important.
Excuse me, does everybody hear the questions or do we need a microphone? Is there a microphone? Because I think it might be.
We can just repeat the question if you like.
Okay. So the access to the graphs is really important, and I really liked your one on the disaster. But have you guys given any thought to the importance of graph pairing? In other words, to limit the cherry picking? The one that you had on the disaster and the GDP is really, really important, but it's only important when put in the context of the frequency of disaster. So graph pairing, access to graphs, that kind of thing.
Well, I mean, I think it's an excellent point. And I think, you know, when telling a story, when trying to get a point across, you know, one map doesn't tell the whole story, and graph pairing is imperative to actually tell that complete story. And, you know, a graph doesn't tell the whole story either. You need text and you need other information to augment that and give that complete picture. So this is something that I'd say that, you know, that's important to us, and we do, but, you know, we do it hit and miss here and there in terms of some of our successes.
And I would just say, I think what we did last April is that we decided that we needed to decouple data from sense-making of data. So we asked a question, and we said, here's our data. You tell us how to make sense of it. So we had an apps for development competition. Some of you know about this. We got well over 100 apps from 36 countries. We got more apps from Africa than we did from Europe. And they came up with interpretations of our data that we would have never thought of. That was the point. People came up with ways to take rainfall data and, you know, figure out how to show what crops you could grow based on any address in the world. We would have never created that app. We didn't have to. So I think what we're now understanding is how to pick what you do well and let the world do what it does well.
One last question, and then we'll conclude. Yes,
Hi.
ma'am.
I'm not sure if, is this on? Yep.
Yes.
My name's Sheila Weir. I work at State in International Information Programs. And my question is kind of twofold, because we've been working on a project for, what I'm trying to figure out is how to tie in the anecdotal information without adding layer upon layer upon layer. So an example would be money spent for an institution for teaching. This is a very simplified version. Money given in Kenya, let's say $10,000, versus money given in Germany, $10,000 for the same institution. There can be many, many overlays and impact. Why was the money in Kenya? Why are only 10 kids graduating versus in Germany 40 children? And how to tie in all the anecdotal, because there was a flood, because there was post-election violence, because this, where really it's easier to just kind of put an asterisk and say the reason these numbers are so different is blah, blah, blah. But what recommendations do you have about, you can only put so many overlays in before it kind of defeats the purpose. Thanks.
So,
That's
I
the
mean, I
main
just want to say quickly, and I'll let my other panelists also react, that the goal here is not visualization, right? The goal here is to foster understanding. Pictures, visualizations are a tool in a toolkit. I think what you're talking about is the power of telling stories. And so we acting alone are not going to be all that effective, right? We live in an ecosystem of information. So the power of infomediaries, and our friends from the Sunlight Foundation asked the provocative question, are software developers the new truth tellers? Right? That on their own, probably not. But the whole notion of data journalism, the whole notion of people being able to understand these informations, take the super graphics, and tell the narrative, I think will always be necessary. So the example of what you talk about is exactly why we're doing open data masterclasses for journalists, so that they can take this kind of information and tell the story that you can't just tell in one image.
Charles, do you want to say a last word? And then we'll, unfortunately, we'll have to stop. Otherwise, Suzanne is going to kick me off.
Just linked to that point. If you look at the literature on cross-country economic growth, as it might be at the moment, you can draw a graph of investment versus GDP growth over time across countries, and it's dots all over the place. Now, you can then draw that graph saying, well, if you account for the quality of various institutions or the rate of inflation or whatever, what does it look like then? And the dots line up better. And then you head deep into very complicated econometrics very quickly. And you end up with stories in The Economist or the FT saying, these people proved that investment leads to growth. Well, yeah, sort of, if you assume all of these things work together and blah, blah, blah. I think it's important to say that it's not all about visualization. Visualization is one tool. So I think the investment to growth story is best told using two different things. One is some very careful regression analysis with coefficients and all the rest of it, with a number that pops out at the end that hopefully normal people can understand. But the other is a picture of the relationship between investment and growth at any one time. That tells you, those two things tell you, one, it is plausible to imagine there is a relationship under certain circumstances, and the other picture tells you, but the relationship isn't terribly strong. So combining these tools together rather than thinking we can do everything just with maps or just with graphs or just with coefficients or just with text, I think it's what's exciting is that we've now got a lot more opportunities to use visualization in exciting ways because of much more computing power. But we shouldn't get overboard on the excitement and forget everything else.
Well, I think this is a very, we could continue this interesting conversation. I think that we also heard from Professor Tufte that graph and images are not the only thing. I think that his whole, the other, besides the map, the other piece of work that he distributed on, I forget the name, Spark Lines. I think that this is really, to me, as having written lots of World Bank report in my life, I wish I had those, because it really makes a big difference in telling a story. So my conclusion is that we have made a step in transforming very dry information into images, but it's not the only tool we have. And we should keep in mind the admonition of not being cherry pickers, of trying to continue with integrity, with passion, and above all, respect for content is what makes a difference. So I would like to ask you to join me in thanking our panelists for their contributions. And we can all say we have been performing at the Kennedy Center. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Guess what?
I think you had the best data set to show, for sure. Now you've created a new theme that I've started, so it's quotable to the state. This is the worst text file I've ever encountered.
I'm just going to give you my presentation.
I don't know if you remember.
I know. I missed the last one. Hey, I've been meaning to come see what you guys need volunteers for the next thing or something. Or do you take outside of, I know the security stuff.
Let's talk.
Yeah.
Do you have a space? Is that what I thought? Okay.
I can have mine.
Okay.
I'm a consultant at the moment, but I just find it interesting and I'm not going to learn anything.
Yeah, let's talk. I mean, we actually work with partners around this course. You know, I approached Kennedy Center and this one it worked out, but I mean, normally it's, yeah.
Let me grab
What's
the
up?
person I want to meet. I'll get in touch with you afterward because I think you're
Okay.
too busy right
We're
now.
going straight to another
That was
panel
a
right
ringer.
now, too.
Okay,
So-
I'm going to just go talk.
Sure. No problem. Yeah. Good, nice to meet you. Yeah. Yeah. Where's the
So funny. It's like one panel in, the other panel out. Yeah.
Careful. You always got to watch the end of the stage, I guess. I'm sorry, I didn't
Yo,
exactly.
the development gap. Hold on.
I'm going to step off next.
Yeah. We're doing the transfer. Thank you, Aline.
Any particular order we need?
Whatever you wish. Adam is the moderator, so let me grab it.
Good luck. Yeah, I know you picked me up, but
There was an order on the website.
All right, so we're gonna get started here. All right, guys, or shall I say dudes, we're going to go straight into the next panel. So if everybody could take their seats again, that would be awesome. Yeah?
That's regular VGA, that thing. I guess so.
All right, let's get started. Next panel features some tremendous minds. They're going to discuss the latest trends in data visualization. This panel will be moderated by a great friend of mine, Adam Bly, who I'm so psyched is here from the Seed Media Group. We've also got David Belinsky. I just want to say these words. He describes himself as a pixel evangelist. He will soon be an emeritus of Ex Vivo and is transitioning into e-immersion learning, digital interactive publishing company focused on science books. We've also got Jonathan Cousins from Cousins and Sears Creative Technologists, and David McConville from Illuminati. Gentlemen, thank you.
I'll do it from here and then I'll go back over there. Well, good morning, everyone. So we'll do the same kind of format. We'll just kind of run down the line and give you a little bit of food for thought and images for thought from some work from these three great practitioners of data visualization. I'm going to share with you a little bit of some of the work we're doing at Seed to historically take science and communicate it out to the public and complex issues, and more recently, a community platform that we've launched called Visualizing in partnership with universities and NGOs all over the world. And then we'll have some conversation about some of the trends within the field itself, how things are changing, some of the questions and issues within data visualization, and hopefully this will kind of envelop the conversations this morning and the one we just had now, kind of where the field itself is going, what the new techniques and tools are, and how you might think 1 year, 5 years out of how the capability of data visualization might impact the actual problems that you're trying to solve. So let me share with you this project first, just by way of kind of setting a stage and sort of a little bit about how we think about data visualization at Seed. So here's the vision for the project, and we'll jump right into it. Can we just get the sound? No? So that's visualizing, kind of a vision for it. What we're trying to do, this is what the site looks like. We launched it about a year ago. Visualizing is a community of designers, of people within the open data community, of policymakers, of educators, using data and design to help make sense of complex issues. The entire site is operated under a Creative Commons license, and so we have a community of designers who are connecting with the open data community to take your challenges and respond to them and make the content available to the world under CC. So really what we're trying to do is close the loop. A lot of what you just heard is the now plethora of data being made available by agencies in this room and so many others around the world. And the challenge is, how do we make sense of it, and how do we turn it over to a community of designers and design experts who can actually do something with it and start mashing it up and creating creative works to help the world understand the issues that you care about, we care about. So what we're doing is engaging the academic community as another stakeholder in this, engaging the NGO community, and engaging media partners. So you'll get a sense looking at the site of how media partners, newspapers, magazines, conferences around the world are then taking the visualizations around these world issues and disseminating out to the broader public. So this is a way of taking the underlying data, the intermediary of data visualization and design, and then bringing it out to the general public. So a huge part of this for us is relationships with academic partners. We've worked with 50 universities around the world and continuing to grow. So these are universities that are interested in how they can start bringing data visualization into the classroom to help them understand a whole range of development, sustainability, economic, political issues. And we create a whole variety of tools to help educators bring this data visualization capability into the classroom. And we're working with NGOs, government agencies, most recently UN Global Pulse, UNDP, World Economic Forum, HHS, and a whole variety of agencies. And every month or so launching challenges where we're taking a problem that they're dealing with, for example, most recently with Global Pulse, looking at how neglected populations around the world viewed the economic recovery and the issue around the recession, and using mobile data to actually crowdsource that knowledge, and then turn that data, which otherwise would have sat, as you saw, sort of in spreadsheets, and turn it over to the design community to help us better understand that issue. We just did a challenge this month on education, and I noticed we had a winner of that challenge in the audience today. And another big part of the project, and here's something that we'd love to invite you to be a part of, is actually bringing students together from around the world to actually tackle these issues in their local countries. So beginning this weekend in Sydney, and then throughout the year in Sao Paulo, Berlin, London, and New York, we'll have about 100 students in each one of these cities participating 24 hours in a kind of hackathon format, actually trying to tackle a real-world problem affecting their country through data visualization and using open data from local sources. So CSIRO, for example, in Australia, or UNDP. So certainly would love to invite universities, academic partners, NGOs who may want to be involved in these kind of projects. And then I'll just leave you with one other thought, and hopefully this could be a discussion point for us as a panel. What we've found through our own work in data visualization over the last few years, trying to take complex scientific ideas and communicate them or better understand them through data visualization, and also through the thousands of projects that we come across at Visualizing, is that we've reached the point now where what's certainly interesting is what can we now see. There's plenty we can now see as a result of these new techniques, but what's profoundly more interesting is what can we now know. So both through the availability of the kinds of data sources that are now being made available, through the combination of techniques that you're going to hear about today, and really more than anything else through combining these techniques, combining these data sources, what can we now start to understand for the first time about complex systems? So it might be things about cities, how memories form in cities, how information travels in cities, where people co-locate in cities, for example, and a tremendous amount of new knowledge that's being generated through the mashup, the combination of open data sources and data visualization. It might be about society at large. These are some really interesting projects, all of them on Visualizing, to look at development, to look at dispersion of memes, to look at how information spreads. That was a particularly important project during Egypt. How can we now combine these to better understand society at large and the machinations of society? And finally, even human behavior. How can we understand, this is one project using Wikipedia data and a visualization project, how can we understand how people arrive at consensus, how they make decisions in community, even how people move, actually physically move, and what impacts their movements around a particular environment. So this is just maybe some food for thought about what questions do we want to understand about complex systems like these, that now the availability of data and the techniques you're going to hear about today could yield some profoundly new, at least modes of inquiry, if not answers. So with that, let's go down the line. We'll just give you some starting remarks, and then we'll have some panel discussion.
Good morning. It's really cool to be involved in a conference that's actually dedicated to confusing the issue with facts. The thing is that there are so many facts that sometimes the story underlying the facts gets lost. And really, when we're trying to communicate with other people, it's all about storytelling, it's all about convincing. If you could roll the first video just to give you background, Eye Candy. This is a compendium of some of the kinds of visual problem solving that my company, XVivo, has been involved in. Actually, this very first one is very similar to the Tech at State starting slide. The work that my company has been doing for the past 30 years is taking complex time and motion-dependent concepts in medicine and science and bringing them to the screen in a way that people could find them not only memorable, but inspirational and sticky. Something that they can remember, something they can build upon, something that will cause them to want to learn more about the topic and not just see this as something that's passed some time, then on to the other thing. And one of the things that is always important in looking at the data visualization is that the time compression element is really, really important. If you're looking at a particular case, which I think could you run that tape, or is that possible to do? There was a problem that I was approached with by a friend of mine who is a senior investigator, a principal investigator at the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and he had a problem. And the problem was that he had an initiative that he wanted to begin that was going to allow the could you probably put that in? Yeah. And whoever you need to have a. Yeah, great. Thank you. Rick Satava is a really interesting guy. He's not only a surgeon, but he's also a military officer and was in charge of the MASH units in the first Gulf War, and was very concerned about the trending down of non-spear point military personnel in the Army, which means that if you're not carrying a weapon, in 20 years there's going to be 1/3 fewer of you, and that means medics. So as a surgeon, he was very, very concerned with what can he do with technology to begin to ameliorate this and possibly enhance the ability of an urban combat soldier to survive a combat encounter if he's injured. And so the issue here was, how do you convince congressmen who are not necessarily steeped in science to commit money to an initiative which will have its play out in 20 years? And how do you do this in a complex environment where the amount of time that you've been allotted to make your story, to convince the people who are going to vote on whether you get the money or not, is 5 minutes? And how do you give them a sense in that 5 minutes? How do you sacrifice a certain amount of that time to give them a sense of where this kind of initiative is going to trend, where it's going to help soldiers, and how it's going to be valuable in the future, not just for the military, but for civilians. So we came up with a story which allowed him to spend his 5 minutes convincing the Science and Technology Committee in Congress, plus the technology and other people from DARPA, that this was a worthy cause. Now, this is just a compendium of some of the work that my company, XVivo, has been doing to visualize science. So this is sort of a background to the next video, which I'm going to show you. That's the Luke arm that's being done by DECA for soldiers who have lost arm in battle. But the thing that's really interesting about this story is, how do you take a large set of data that could take an hour to an hour and a half to describe to a non-technical audience and make them understand this, make them believe in it, make them feel that it's a worthy cause, and compress that information into 90 seconds and make it stick? And so what we had to do is we had to depose not only Rick Satava, but we had to talk to a lot of the other companies around the country that are working on disparate technologies that might be used in creating a system that would allow soldiers in an urban combat environment to be followed around by intelligent robots, by intelligent assistants, by an intelligent, autonomous, armored surgical device that could autonomously retrieve soldiers who've been injured, bring them safely into this device, scan their dog tags on which there is information containing their entire 3D biometric data, compare that biometric data of the healthy soldier to the biometric data that a scan in this Surgipod would get, and then using heuristics and artificial intelligence decide what structures had been injured sufficiently that would be required to be stabilized in order for this soldier to be safely transported to a surgical hospital and be allowed to have a full recovery. So there's a lot of information involved, a lot of technologies involved, a lot of different types of things that were involved that needed to be compressed into a 90-second presentation in order to have any effectiveness at all. And what we found was that with the 3.5 minutes that Dr. Satava was able to introduce the problem, and the 90 seconds that our video, if you could run the next video, which is DARPA, which our next video shows you what the committee saw, and Dr. Satava was the first principal investigator for DARPA to actually get his money at the committee meeting instead of waiting 6 months to 9 months for either an acceptance or a rejection. So this is an urban combat team. A soldier goes down, he's injured. The heads-up display on the squadron commander's visor tells him which soldier's been injured. The autonomous robots that follow the combat soldiers around can identify that the soldier's been injured, take him into an armored surgipod, which we call the rotisserie, which we basically redesigned as from a Humvee, or from a Bradley fighting vehicle. His scan is compared to his dog tag information. It's found he's got shrapnel in his leg. The surgical instruments begin putting in an IV autonomously, and they begin to dismantle his armor, open up the site. And as you can see, there's little teeny cameras on all of these instruments so that it's all being monitored by real people, but it's all autonomous. And the surgery takes place, the shrapnel's taken out, the wound is sanitized, sealed, and the pod is covered with a protection, and it's hoisted up into an autonomous pilotless vehicle to be taken to the to a surgical hospital. And all of this is technology that's in development. All of this is technology that is disparate and had to be collected and had to be put into a somewhat fanciful story, but it held together, and it allowed Dr. Satava to get his funding so that all of this is proceeding apace. And some of these materials are now being used in Afghanistan and Iraq. Most significantly, the pad on which the soldier was resting in the surgipod, which is able to establish life support and monitoring functions, and those are being used today. So it's a different kind of data than you've been hearing about with some of these other folks, but it's a huge amount of data, and the visualization is really the key to telling the story in a convincing enough way that it has a real-world effect. Thank you.
You'll discover that I was really just the right person to follow you. A lot of what my group does is develop technology with demands like this, like those David just said, and of course, like Adam has described, and a variety of other different people. We were lucky enough to start as a data visualization development and design studio, and so we were that kind of a practice from the start. And as a result, we grew up on DataViz, and we use those, the way you develop and design a data visualization and work with data as a way of working with everything that we develop. You know, all of the aspects of agility and everything else, and the way you approach problem solves, and kind of the highness of the bar that you're trying to achieve. And as we have, I'm going to show you quite a wide variety of things, but everything that we have that I'll show you, it came at a stage, but it is an addition. It's not like we changed course. We do all of these things, you know, usually at the same time, or two or three of them at the same time. So when we started, my partner and I was just the two of us, and we worked with experimental network analysis with a variety of people, actually most of whom were in DC, and they had these really brilliant ideas for a very elegant database and data structure that we needed to come up with an equally unique front end, and this is one of many different screens that we came up with for that project. From there, people started recognizing that, well, okay, they can work with real data and they can actually produce results and do analytics and stuff, but I wonder if they could do it in a way that's entertaining. And so more and more we started picking up people who, picking up clients who wanted things that they said, well, we know that there's data art, and there's, of course, the expression viz porn, because it's just great viz to look at. It doesn't necessarily do anything, but it's great to look at. And what people would say to us is, okay, well, we have that stuff, and it's great, but we want it to be something that you could actually get real information from. So it has to be both of those things. And data art that works was a phrase that was given to us by a client. This is specifically what they wanted. So we found our way into entertainment, and from there into mainstream media, which we discovered quickly was a way that as long as you had the right client, you could get to the point where they understood the data and they were really good at telling a story already. But ultimately, the proof of strategy we actually had to develop we kind of had to give them a prototype. So we started working in a lot of the types of computational tech tools, using real data and stuff, but things that you could quickly develop, like this is a sketch from a snapshot from a sketch we made in processing where we were going to be visualizing earthquake data and earthquake impact and tectonic plate movement and populations and all that kind of stuff. So we had to give them not just you can't just give them an Illustrator file. We had to give them something because you use the term motion dependent, which is a very difficult thing to explain to someone how the metaphors that you start to discover in data or the narrative that it may have or just the nature of the data itself might be motion dependent. So we discovered over time that these proof of strategies really needed to be part of actually getting the gig. Here is an example of one that was relatively widely distributed that we worked on with Popular Mechanics and with the USGS. So they provided this data feed and we were asked to just make a visualization about earthquake data. And so what we learned from that process was that, well, in addition to learning how to code Objective-C, was that editorial, when you get the right kinds of editors, they are one of the best partners in data visualization because if you don't necessarily always have access to the domain expert, they're going to help you keep it focused on what you don't yet understand and where that needs to go. So the kinds of conversations we had were in the negative space of what the domain expert already knows. For example, we had conversations about the different types of RSS feeds that were available. And they had one that was the last 7 days that started with a magnitude of 1 and higher, everything up from that. And then there was one other for 7 days that was 2.5. So we were able to understand something about the discipline, something about the domain of geology and about understanding seismic activity by the fact that they published two APIs, two feeds, one of which was 1, basically everything, and the other one was 2.5. We were able to understand that 2.5 was something significant to that type of scientist. So it's very hard to do data visualization without the domain expert, without the person there. But editorial tends to make that process a little bit easier. And so through that process, we learned how to turn that into some workflows that a variety of companies, Hearst and some others, use now. From there, we started getting into storytelling in much more of a theatrical type space, which was not something we'd ever set out to do. But again, we were asked by someone, can you make data art something that is still data art, but is actually also real and actually does tell a story? And so the character that we were given to make a fake presentation for was described as Hans Rosling, a Al Gore, an Inconvenient Truth, Buckminster Fuller, and Joel Osteen, the megachurch preacher. So all of these different conventions that they have used when they've discussed ideas about information and about persuasion and design. And of course, with Hans Rosling is his performance is the most special thing about that. Everything else is a Western Civ class. It's great information and very interesting, but the performance is really, it's what the editor does when you work with a good editor. And so it was incredibly engaging. He is the engagement there. So we try to work with all these different elements and bring them together into this performance. So we created a visualization, storytelling with spectacle and scale. So we created a system for synchronizing six interactive screens, borrowing from all the ideas of the people I just talked about. And they had three-dimensional globes, and they had, these visualizations are actual data with actual information that we researched because there was an opinion that we wanted to get across that this person was making this argument. So, we just started to realize through this that data visualization was a production value, and that was something that we could use to, the idea of engagement necessarily might be the only aspect of it that you ever use in some cases. So we have tried to avoid doing that because it's not as interesting and it's not as rewarding in the end, but ultimately sometimes it leads to that. And frequently those things look like this, but this actually was a reflection of all this data that we were collecting about everything from the housing price index to Second Life, territorial acquisitions, and there's a guy who actually in Texas sells real estate on the moon. and has made millions of dollars since the 80s doing that. So it was this combination of all these different real pieces of data. And a kaleidoscope for adults is usually what you get with when it's just production values, and that was kind of that's the line from this performance, which is actually going to be in Sundance, which again is not something we ever set out to do as a data visualization studio, but here it is. That particular project really kind of reawakened with my partner and myself. He's an electrical engineer and also a fabricator, to get involved with hardware again in a really significant way. So we've started working with autonomous vehicles, and it is hard. It's very hard, as you know, and there's a reason you have to take a lot of time to convince people to invest a lot, because it's very difficult. But as you can see in this video, I'm just running it back really quickly, this thing is sensing the ground. It knows where the ground is. It's looking at the ground. And we used visualization and agile data techniques to measure this and map this, improve the math that we were using to do it, to stabilize it. And you'll notice when it pans back over, you'll see my partner Nick, he's actually got his hands off the controllers. Let's look at his thumbs. And he's holding it just in case we screwed up, or in case the math wasn't right, but it knows, it can find the ground, it's looking for it, and it has these sets of instructions, so we're mimicking nature. So in terms of new work, we're going back a little bit more, and with DataViz, and we're productizing some research that I'd started a while ago. I'm not sure how well you can see that, but we've always been interested in ways you can add dimensions, and one of those things areas we were interested in doing that was in how you can reflect more information about relationships, specifically frequencies between entities. Like an example, two people or a group of people, this person may have some sort of conversation in some form with this person on a very high frequency, so you'd visualize that with a lot of transactions between them. This node and this person and this person have much lower, so obviously you'd have much less of an exchange between them. So what we decided to do was expand this into the notion of just using paths as a tool, as a container for looking at frequency between nodes. Because once you do that, you can use it for anything else. And in this example, which is a prototype, we actually have the product is something that's a little too difficult to demonstrate from up here, but it's on the iPad now. But using these ideas of having paths as an empty container, we created this example which has in it data about migration, UN data about migration. It was one that we could actually get our hands on between. Ooh, darn it. Showing you something over there. Where's that? All right, sweet. So these are the close to the top 10 destination countries of the world, and where all the people are coming from. And so between each of those countries is a path, and there's a frequency between those, for each country, because there's an amount of people we know in a certain year that have come between, that have traveled from that country to this country of destination. So, it's definitely got the engagement part covered, and it's kind of a mesmerizing thing to look at. And of course, it has some of the basics we always see in visualization, like once you just plot dots in a map, the map will rebuild itself and all that other kind of stuff. But when you look at this, when you try to break these problems down, and this is what we do usually internally on projects, and we haven't really done this in a way that faces outward. When you, I'm going to pause it 1 second. When you use agile techniques and data visualization practices to develop any piece of technology, you do have to break things down to these very abstract elements, which is what we've done here. But once you've done that, you can use them in a lot of different ways. And the way that we use it here that's different, in addition to this, is we will break the map apart now and split the difference between the map and GDP per capita. So instead of longitude now, instead of the latitude position on the globe, you have GDP per capita, but you retain the longitudinal position on the globe. So what you've done is kind of like Tufte was recommending, you stayed flat, but you added this additional axis to it. So you understand things, and the narrative starts to tell itself that it can't see all that well, but everything is now moving upward. because these are the top destinations, these are the places where our opportunities are. And so it's a two-dimensional space with a three-dimensional expression. So that's where we're headed with that. And again, we work on all of these, in all these different areas all the time. So this is, of course, one of many different things. This is something that we're actually going to make available through the App Store. Large parts of it are going to be free, so there'll be a big open source component. There'll be some that aren't, but certainly this type of technology will be available to most people. Which part rebuilds itself? I'm sorry? I might have meant when you reorganize it on the screen in a way, when you split the difference with the map and you add a scalar data value to it instead of using its latitudinal position to create its height on the screen. Yeah, so once you interact with it, you can change the axes. So you could go through a very long list of scalar values to reapply them and cause that same effect. To look for correlations again.
You'll have to input the new data. I mean, I thought maybe you were putting in a formula that, you discovered that, okay, it's not going to...
Well, that's the thing. That part of this project is that there is a web-based API. So you can, if you had an account, you can just pump any data that you wanted to through an API, and it's always, available once you've added it. So yes and no and something else, I guess.
Okay, I think we're ready to switch over. Oh, perfect. So we've actually got a nice scale thing going on here because we were looking at cellular visualizations earlier and kind of talking on the meso level. So now I'm going to go to the macro scale. My company works with immersive visualization environment. It's supposed to be black right now. That's good. Immersive visualization. So we really focus on how do you create environments that are replicable for really kind of facilitating and focusing attention so that people can have dialogues around really key issues. So I'm just going to show a really quick video demonstrating one of our systems. Could I get the sound turned on? Great, thanks. This is a product called the Geodome we make that's kind of a portable, immersive visualization environment. What you're seeing is a lot of real-time interactive data from astrophysical visualization, data sets of the radiosphere, the Earth's magnetosphere, and we work very closely with a number of agencies and groups to collect this data, to look at phenomena at the cosmic scale, the global scale, the regional scale. And then we network these systems together so that we can then have scientists and educators in different parts of the world giving these presentations. But instead of talking about kind of the technical aspects of this, I wanted to step back for a minute to maybe talk a little bit about context for the nature of the work that we're doing. Namely, looking at immersion and visualization in the course of human history and really the evolutionary function that it's played. And if you think of the night sky as kind of the original immersive environment, our species has really for thousands of generations been imagining these mythic stories. We use these mnemonic devices that we imagine in our mind's eye to keep track of the relationships between the heavens and earth so that we can kind of synchronize with the cycles of life here. cultures from around the world have developed all these different techniques. Here you see lunar phases in bone, the Niebuhr disk discovered in Germany. This has really been important for survival. I mean, we wouldn't be here if we didn't develop these visualization techniques. So this is not something new that we're doing. It's very historically grounded because this was really key to understanding procreation and hunting and gathering, agriculture, development of navigation. And these various visual interpretations really help to shape the cultural imaginations and perceptions of reality around the world. But technologies do have a tremendous impact on this. This is Copernicus's heliocentric model of the sun, and this was in large part, the success of this was due to the invention of the printing press shortly beforehand. And so he proposed this new counterintuitive model of the universe that humanity was no longer at the center, of course, but it could be replicated and controlled in terms of the types of visualization that was put out to the world. And it really became one of the most effective visualizations in history. I mean, it's challenged centuries of beliefs about this Earth-centered universe, right? And really spawned the scientific revolution. And this is important in the context of what we're doing now, because as these technologies become available, like back then it was telescopes, microscopes, it was dramatically extending the range of human perception. It really changed the way that people were perceiving the world, but it also resulted in these specialized disciplines and techniques that we take for granted now, that all of the phenomena across the spectrum of reality are specialties. And increasingly, over the course of the scientific revolution, it seemed that the best way to understand nature was by reducing it into its component parts. And so over the next few centuries, the modern paradigm emerged, which we're really living in now, and the primary trait of which was this perceived separation from attempts for a perceived separation of humanity from nature and our attempts to really dominate nature. So this has all given us really extraordinary capacities for understanding the world we're in. We can study and manipulate it in unprecedented ways. This is a visualization done through the American Museum of Natural History of artificial satellites around the planet. And it's given us these new perspectives on things, right? But it's kind of been this double-edged sword. And that science and technology, while giving us all of these capacities for increasing life, life extension and the health and well-being of people around the planet, that we're also so good at manipulating things that we're extending ourselves beyond what the Earth can regenerate on a yearly basis. So this is from the Global Footprint Network. This is an example of the extent of the resources that we're using on the planet. If everybody consumed like Americans, it would take 5 planets to regenerate the number of resources that we're currently consuming. So I think one of the greatest challenges of our time is really reinserting ourselves into this world, into this ecological reality that sustains us. I mean, this is the really big picture thing that we've always, as a species, had to understand in order to survive. So the key to these immersive environments is to really help people to focus attention on these cycles of life once again and these intimate connections between our social and ecological realities. So to address this, my company is currently working with science centers around the United States, informal science institutions, using these scientific visualization tools and exploring how we can encourage audiences to really step back out of their day-to-day realities and start to think globally, to really understand that we humans are a superorganism on this planet having a tremendous impact. And we're fortunate because there are these amazing facilities in science centers around the world and the country right now that are primarily visualizing astronomical data. It's kind of an evolution of the planetarium, but there are these digital projectors in there. And so we're working to engage communities in dialogues around these issues. Now, this has been funded by a NOAA Environmental Literacy Grant for the next 3 years. But we're focused on how can we help to connect kind of the cosmic scale phenomena, the conditions for life that we understand are necessary for this planet. Because when we hear about habitable zones and other solar systems, they're 20 light years away, which is hundreds of thousands of years in travel. So we don't have a backup planet. And so it's important to get people oriented towards how unique this planet actually is within any relative timescales of travel. And we're fortunate because we actually have a new model of the cosmos that's about 10 years old. It's called the Digital Universe Atlas. It's an aggregation of astrophysical data sets from around the planet. They're already using this. So we're really trying to turn the focus around and focus on Earth. Of course, you can see this on YouTube now. AMNH posted it. The only things that have more hit than this, I think, are like David at the Dentist and Surprise Kitty on the recommended links next to it. So a lot of people haven't actually seen this, but maybe Google it. And we've adopted this approach. So earlier, there was a discussion around visualization really isn't just the thing. There isn't, what we've discovered is there's not some magical image that's going to give people these epiphanies, that it's really got to be within a continuum of storytelling and of engagement. And so we've adopted this, kind of reduced it down to a simple approach that we call seeing, knowing, and doing, which the idea is to integrate and connect kind of visual thinking, which so much of this is about, systems thinking so that people can think more comprehensively, and design thinking so that we can be very intentional about the types of projects and approaches that we're discussing, not just approaches to Edward Tufte's point earlier, but the actual actions. And one of the ways in which we're using the visual thinking is to look across these different scales to help people to understand why it is that we're not perceiving a number of things that are occurring around us all the time. So we've got kind of the spatial scales, the spatial dimension. Here you see a visualization of the thermohaline conveyor belt done by NASA. The spectral scales, you can see ocean currents, temporal scales, melting of glaciers, informational data. These are tracks of ships going across the English Channel. But we're using all of these within real-time environments to facilitate these dialogues. And from a systems perspective, we're really focused, NOAA's very focused on climate change, but we proposed to them that we really focus on the planetary boundaries, which is a framework proposed by the Stockholm Resilience Center and the Institute on the Environment at the University of Minnesota, which is looking at really all the connections, not only with climate change, but with ocean acidification and land use and biodiversity loss, and nitrogen cycles and how that relates to agriculture. So we're developing narratives specific to the locations we're working with. So we just did one in Denver around water. We're doing one in North Carolina now around resilience. And so we're trying to localize these things so that they're not so big and intimidating, that people can really get a grasp on the relationship to their communities. And from a doing perspective, I think it's very important that we focus on projects that are very, very high leverage. So we're working with the Buckminster Fuller Institute. They have what's called the Buckminster Fuller Challenge. Adam was a jury last year, on the jury last year. And these are really designed projects. The challenge is designed to identify projects that have the significant possibility and potential of making the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation without ecological offense or to the disadvantage of anyone, right? So you might as well aim your sights high, and what we're discovering with these projects that are filtering through and becoming finalists in this project is it really demonstrates what humans are capable of by understanding leverage points and looking at systems and how we solve problems across disciplines. And by using these visualizations, we're really, that's kind of the point, is to move beyond reductionism so that we can use the tools that have resulted from that approach in modern science, but really help people to really understand the big picture and how we can develop approaches to a lot of these complex problems that are much more comprehensive. And there are some of the links if you want to check it out for further information. Thanks.
Okay, so in the interest of time, let's go straight to your questions. And you digested a lot in the last half hour, so I'm sure they'll be fairly diverse. Who wants to go up to a mic? Then I will start with one. Okay.
Quick, is this working? Yeah, it's working now. One thing you didn't talk, you talked about the visualization engagements you're undertaking. For the lay people who are not visualization savvy, people who are used to using the spreadsheet application, the Word application, whatever, where do you see the future of visualization going for that audience? Where do you see a democratization of visualization happening?
Was it to anyone specifically or just generally?
Nope, generally.
Let's take it.
Well, I can take it.
Go ahead.
Quick. One of the reasons that it was mentioned that I'm going emeritus with XVivo is because XVivo has basically been a vehicle for doing other people's visualization, and one of the things that I've been really concerned about a lot is democratization of visualization. And so instead of doing other people's projects, I'm going to be working with teams of people to do our projects, which would include iPad applications, which would allow people to put in their own metrics for their own health data, be able to understand what these metrics mean, be able to gauge how their behaviors and interactions with their family, with their physician, with other people in their lives can help them modify their own health data so that they can have some effect on their own lives, their own longevity, their own health in the long term. And so the issue for us is how do we get a large amount of information that can be interacted with, that can be immersive, that can be handled by the user and used by the user and understood by the user and added to by the user in a way that is effective and a way that is democratic and in a way that can be tuned to the level of understanding of the user, so that the user can come in with any number of levels of education and find a level of vocabulary and interactivity that they can understand, that they can tune into, and that they can use in their own lives. So that's something that's very important. That's something that's coming, and this tool, among others, is probably the leading edge of where that's going.
I might just add briefly that from a science education and design education standpoint, the National Academies of Science, I think, partially recognizing that being able to deal with abundant data is going to be a critical skill for almost anyone, over the next 20 years, has recently included this kind of capability of being able to see patterns, of being able to deal with big data as part of a new set of standards that they've just introduced about a month ago for national science technical education. So from an education standpoint, that's also the sort of information literacy bit is now being considered. Another question? Yep.
A lot of that will become a much more successful process once there's a lot of development in with someone with your experience, as along for the ride, because you're going to be able to help whoever architects that system, whether they're more visual design savvy or they're much more of a programmer or an engineer or some collection of those things. You're going to be able to help them identify what has value to you as part of your process, but also, what constitutes a significant conclusion. And you can design to that, but you can't design to that out of thin air. There's nothing better than having a domain expert to work with. I mean, it really is a tremendous gift, and it's not that often you get it. But once you're there with them as a designer, for speaking, and an engineer, for speaking from my perspective, I get an opportunity to do that thing, to learn something. I sit there and have this almost therapist-like relationship with someone where I'm pulling out, what is it that you're taking for granted about your own sense of value, about your discipline? Like I had a really great conversation with a journalist a couple of years ago where he was talking about the value of documents and the value of a press release. And he said, well, it's valuable because, it was written in advance and blah, blah, blah. And right there, it was written in advance. And he took that for granted entirely. And that's actually something that can work its way into an architecture and should work its way into an architecture for a specific discipline, because it's going to be how you actually determine what's a significant conclusion.
If I might add to that, there's Steve Jobs was asked if what kind of public polling and what kind of surveys did he do in order to design the iPad and see what the public would want. And he said that it's not up to the public to decide what they want, because that's not really the province of it. What you do is you design something that's a tool that's open enough and robust enough and clever enough that the public seeing it will put their own value of what they want from that tool and design things that the designers of the tool would never have thought of.
I think we'll leave it there because Suzanne has no fear and she will come literally grab us. But I think you've seen a field that's entirely blossoming. You've seen a lot of amazing things here. This is a field that's on the cusp of becoming even more democratized. The software is changing, the languages are changing, the techniques are changing, the sites are evolving. So there really should be no reason why it's not available to any kind of problem set, within the next months or year. Thanks, everyone. Thank you to you.